and welcome to Wake the Dead. So the songs that we had just listened to are Scarlet Begonias, Ramble on Rose, and He's Gone. Scarlet Begonias is one I'm always wanting to play some on here. I think it's a good example of it's kind of everything the Dead does right, honestly. As I've talked about probably a dozen times on this show at this point, I love that song. I really do. Some of the lines in it have inspired pieces of a future D&D campaign I'm planning, and I think it's fun how these intersections of creativity and stuff, like how you can use inspiration from a song for something, like a tabletop gaming campaign or movies, videos, anything like that. Ramble on Rose is, if I remember correctly, it was pretty much a nonsense song that Robert Hunter had written. I remember reading a interview that Robert Hunter had done about the song, kind of talking about what it means and stuff. And essentially it doesn't really mean anything. He sat down and wrote a bunch of stuff that he thought sounded fun and made a song out of it. I think that's great, personally. I love that kind of attitude towards songwriting and stuff. And then finally we have He's Gone, which is a absolute Grateful Dead classic right there. It was that's the song that had spawned the name for their logo, Steal Your Face, and that whole kind of idea of steal your face right off your head. That's common within the Deadhead community and stuff like that. And I think it's kind of telling. It's kind of telling as well about how meaningful these songs can be to people. When there's a person on the dead.net website his name is David Dodd, and he does a blog series essentially talking about each of the Grateful Dead songs on a different week. He'll do he'll talk about their history, what they make them feel, all kinds of good stuff like that. So if you want to I think it's a good starting place for kind of getting a little bit deeper into the meaning of different Dead songs and stuff like that. But it's kind of telling to me when his entire blog for He's Gone doesn't end up really talking about the song very much as it talks about, how much meaning the songs can bring to people, and how the songs often are kind of, you can use it to reflect whatever kind of meaning you want within your life, depending on what you need. Now each song can kind of, mean something a little bit different to each person listening, different interpretations and stuff like that. Anyways, today I wanted to talk a little bit about this Cyclospora outbreak that has been happening. I've mentioned it a couple of times on previous shows, but I figure I want to get one recorded, have some information, just out on the record, kind of a permanent place to go back and find some information, stuff like that. Currently, as I'm recording this, as we're doing the show, according to foodsafety.com, this is Food Safety Magazine, the person who wrote this article is named Bailey Henderson. It says they're the director of content strategy for Food Safety Magazine, and it doesn't have credentials on here, so I don't know if they've got a PhD in food safety or something, or epidemiology or anything like that. As of July 24th, which was 4 days ago, as of recording, which is today's July 28th, there have been the outbreak involving Taylor Farms has expanded to 9 states, with nearly 2,000 cases confirmed by the CDC. This is saying that Michigan and Northwestern Ohio are reporting about 10,000 cases, and the FDA is investigating apparently 3 other illness clusters. And so it's been obviously it's just in the thousands. It's not like COVID-19 level pandemic where we're getting, hundreds of thousands of cases and people are dying left and right. Luckily, that is not the case. Cyclosporiasis is a parasitic infection, and it generally isn't deadly, but mostly it's uncomfortable. Common symptoms of it tend to include diarrhea, dehydration. I've heard in some rare cases vomiting, stuff like that, and low-grade fever and general nausea, I think, were other two pretty common ones. And so, generally, with this disease and others kind of similar, the big danger with it isn't really the disease itself, or maybe like your immune system's reaction to it, like it is with some viruses. Because the big issue with a lot of viruses is that they'll trigger an immune response within you, and your body's immune response for most cases is to raise the heat to a level that nothing can live. And unfortunately, that nothing includes you. You can't live in that heat for too long either. So it's just a pretty cool mechanism, I think. It's just firing up the generators a little bit more to heat stuff up. But more for something more like cyclosporiasis or other infections kind of like it, your danger more lies within the dehydration and stuff like that. So it's important to drink plenty of fluids, try to eat if you can, I guess, and to, if you need to go to the hospital, do that. Don't, if you feel severely dehydrated, get medical attention as you see fit, obviously. I would hope that's not something I have to state, but definitely do that. Let's see. Interestingly, in this article, there was hold on. There's a thing in here talking about how leading epidemiology, food microbiology, and food policy experts discuss food net cuts. Because a big part of why, or at least why a lot of people, I guess I should probably hit the disclaimer real quick. Hold on. The views and opinions expressed by me do not reflect the views and opinions of WZMB 91.3 FM Greenville or East Carolina University. These are my opinions, my views, all that type of stuff. But in my opinion, a big part of why it's gotten to the point it has and why people have been freaking out so much about cyclosporiasis is because there's been a program that was tracking this stuff by the CDC called FoodNet, and recently it has been cut down to only tracking like two different things. So before there were like budget cuts and stuff like that, FoodNet was tracking 8 different diseases, with one of those including cyclosporiasis. And then eventually they had cut it down so that they're only actually tracking 2 diseases, those being E. coli and salmonella, if I'm remembering correctly. And so cyclosporiasis is not something that they're actively tracking with FoodNet anymore, which isn't to say that nobody's paying attention to it. But the importance of FoodNet is that it was a federal level interstate communication system and surveillance system on food safety. So if one state is having issues with some of their produce, then they can easily and effectively communicate with all the other state health departments about what's going on and keep up to date information, stuff like that. And so from what I understand is that since the cuts have happened, it's made it a lot more difficult for states to communicate between their health departments and stuff like that. And it's a very important thing to have done, because our whole logistics system is a very big interstate thing, we don't just eat only North Carolina lettuce and only North Carolina onions and only North Carolina anything. A lot of our stuff comes from all kinds of states all over the place, getting oranges from California and getting peaches and onions from Georgia, and I think we produce a lot of apples, but still, a lot of produce travels between state lines. So when foodborne illness like this crops up, it is, important to have that quick interstate communication so that all the different health departments can, what's the word, like work together on it and they can cooperate. So that's kind of the thought process that brings me to not being entirely happy with this article and what this person here is saying. And obviously, it's not exactly my place to be disagreeing with somebody who's got like degrees in this stuff, but what they're saying kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So this article, once again, is on foodsafety.com, and they're quoting somebody named Sarah Sorcher, JD, MPH. I don't know what either of those mean, honestly. But they're the Director of Regulatory Affairs for the Center for Science in the Public Interest. And they had said, food net cuts didn't cause this outbreak, but they are a symptom of a deeper problem, and that our outbreak response programs are running out of money. So, them leading the sentence with food net cuts didn't cause this outbreak feels like a very misleading thing to me, because I don't think anyone's really saying that the cutting of food net caused the outbreak, Just because we stop observing something and stop, like, having surveillance on it doesn't cause it to start doing something else, We're not, unless you're in, like, the field of quantum physics, I guess, and then stuff starts to get weird. But living at our scale in reality, the human scale, whether you're watching it or not, the same thing is generally going to happen. So the issue is, it's not that the cuts to food net caused the outbreak. It's that the outbreak response was severely hindered by those cuts, We probably would have had some kind of outbreak anyways. The dirty water that is used on the crops, that is generally the case, or generally the reason for a parasite like that, would have been used anyways. The difference is that they would have had a better system to communicate information much easier between state health departments so that they could respond to the outbreak more effectively. So, like, I think that Sarah Sorcher here, leading their sentence with food net cuts didn't cause this outbreak, it just feels like a misleading line to me. That's just something I wanted to mention. It doesn't feel like a real argument, honestly, because we're not saying that the food net cuts caused the outbreak. But I do agree with the latter half of the sentence where they say the outbreak response programs are running out of money, because that, from what I can tell, does seem to be largely true. And it's kind of shows like why focusing so much time, and once this is just my opinion still, but I just don't think that focusing so much time on cutting government spending and making less things happen is very good for us. It seems to me that having cut out the spending on this stuff and not spending money on things that benefit the public, who would have thought that could possibly cause issues, Like, definitely I agree with the portion where they say that, like these food surveillance systems are underfunded, but the solution to that type of thing isn't to cut food net, it's to fund it, it's to give it more money so that it can run as it needs to. Anyways, we've got a little bit more Grateful Dead to play here, and then we will be right back with kind of some parting thoughts on this discussion. Welcome back to Wake the Dead. So the songs that we had just listened to are China Cat Sunflower and I Know You Rider. These two are some absolute classics that the Dead will always play back to back. They pretty much always go together. It's like Scarlet Begonias and Fire on the Mountain, It's like one seldom comes without the other. China Cat Sunflower is kind of an interesting story because apparently it had come to Robert Hunter like as something to turn into a song after he had what he calls a very strange experience, or even like, well, he said it was a very strange experience during what he called a state of altered consciousness while he was at, I want to say, a resort in Mexico, where he saw a cat that had supposedly led him through all these different like environments and stuff like that are described within the song. And I think it's kind of fun how that type of song is paired with I Know You Rider, which is I believe it's like a folk tune where it was more of a, it's not something that the Grateful Dead had created, but just a song that they like to play a lot. It just, that's a lot of the songs in their catalog, I'd say. There's a good number of them are covers or folk tunes and stuff like that they kind of mix with their own pieces. Anyways, where we had left off, we were talking just the last little bit about the Cyclospora outbreak and the budget cuts to the CDC. We were talking about, who was it? It was Sarah Sorcher, and she was somebody talking about how she says the food net cuts didn't cause the outbreak, and essentially I was saying, of course it didn't. That's not what anybody has been saying. But then there's a little bit more on this article. This is quoted from somebody named Barbara. I'm sorry in advance. Barbara Kowalczyk, maybe? They've got a PhD and a master's, and they're an associate professor at the GWU Milken Institute School of Public Health. And they said that FoodNet actually didn't have a funding cut. Really, the system was never funded adequately to track 8 pathogens, and they had to right-size expectations for the amount of funding that they have. That, I'm like 90% sure that's just not true. Like, I don't know if, maybe they didn't have, like, budget cuts necessarily or something like that. I'm not entirely sure on that end. But 100% they did start, like, scaling back their, like, scaling back their efforts and stuff like that. So whether where'd their quote go? So whether it was a funding cut or a writing size expectations so that they're not doing as much so they can do what they can do with the funding they have. Either way, that's notably scaling back operations and actively, like, putting the tracking of Cyclospora on the wayside, So it's like whether it was from budget cuts or just from scaling it back to the budget they had or whatever, in my mind, it doesn't really make a big difference. Obviously that's still just my opinion on the show, but I think that it's like, it's kind of a semantic difference that doesn't really matter too much. Like, they still scaled back their efforts and they're still not actively trying to grow the efforts back, So they're still like not tracking Cyclospora either way. That's just kind of the one issue I've got with this article on food safety, where they're like, most of the stuff these experts are saying isn't like technically a lot of it's true, but it's meaningless. It doesn't really get down to what the issue is and what matters about it, Like, we're not saying the budget cuts caused the outbreak. We're saying that the outbreak has been worsened because of the budget cuts, which, nothing these experts have said contradicts, And we're not saying that, like, or like, a lot of people have been talking about like budget cuts and stuff, but whether it's like active cuts to the budget or if it's just cuts to what they're going to be upholding, it's still cutting back operations either way. So the issue still remains. Like, I don't know. I think a lot of these, I think a lot of these quotes that they've gotten here, It kind of feels like they're trying to defend actions that are kind of indefensible, in my mind at least. Anyways, that's about all the time we've got today for Wake the Dead. Today has been the final normal episode of Wake the Dead for the summer. We will be back next fall during the fall semester. Hope everybody enjoys.